Father, again, we just come to you in prayer, Lord. Just opening our hearts and our minds to your word now. Just asking you would speak to us. Lord, just a few verses, but so much for us to consider. So much for us to understand, Lord, as far as your ways in our life and what you've already accomplished, Lord, by your coming and by your death and resurrection. And Lord, how much is available to us, Lord, if we just move in, Lord, to what you have for us. So, Lord, just teach us now, I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm going to look at the first 5 verses tonight of this final chapter. I'm just going to read down through the 5 verses, and then we'll start exploring what the Lord has for us. Verse 1 says, "Whoever believes that Jesus is the Christ is born of God. And everyone who loves him who begot also loves him who is begotten of him. By this we know that we love the children of God when we love God and keep his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. For whatever is born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Who is he who overcomes the world but he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God?" I love the central theme here, although there's more than one, but one that stands out to me is overcoming the world. And I think if there's anything that we need to learn today, it's how to overcome the world. To answer the question for ourselves, do we have the ability to overcome the world? And if we do, how do we access that? What's the source of that? What does that look like? And really, do we have faith that that's even possible? Because the world's coming after us. And it's moving faster and faster every day. I am at awe, actually, of how fast it's moving. There are things literally hour by hour that are taking place politically, scientifically, medically, combinations of all three, spiritually. There's just, everything is moving. And lo and behold, just like the Bible said, which is good to know. Because if that is happening as the Bible said, then everything else as the Bible said will take place. So in the first 3 verses that we read there, we're given the results of our faith. It's interesting that Clyde mentioned faith, and it's a big part of what we're going to talk about tonight. And it should be a big part of our study at all times. It is what brought you and I into a relationship with the Creator of heaven and earth. It was our faith. Yes, it was his sacrifice, it was his love, his grace, mercy. But on our side of it, it was just, and I say just lightly, it was just our faith. If that's what started the relationship, and yet it's the thing that we're to walk in for the remainder of our time, then it's certainly something that deserves our study. But these first 3 verses talk about we're given the results of our faith. And the first result is the divine birth. The fact that we say, I do. We, as the bride of Christ, we say, I do, to his offer of salvation. From being able to bring us back from the path that we were on, which ended only one place, and that was hell and damnation. So that's the first result of our faith. The second is the love for God, and then very closely attached to that is the love for one's fellow believers. That also comes as a result of our faith. And I would challenge you, and I don't think I need to challenge you, because the word, if you're listening tonight, should challenge you to make sure you believe that's true. Because the opposite of that would really be, it would be disastrous. It would be a waste of our time to move into that relationship with Jesus if that wasn't the outcome. So the first is our divine birth, the second, love for God and the love for our fellow believers, and finally, result of our faith, obedience to God's commandments. Now, very often we might start there. We're worried about, can we do what Jesus has asked us to do? And we get wrapped up then in a system of what can our power do? What can our lives do? What can we do? And the truth is we need to start with him and what he's done. And understand that the manifestation of that are these things, our salvation our love for him and for others. And then finally, just a natural result of that relationship is our obedience to the things that he's asked us to do. Let's look a little bit more at each of those three. The divine birth, John 3:16, most of us know that. Whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. So to have faith, to believe that he is who he says he is, gives us everlasting life. And then a promise that we should not perish. And that second one we mentioned was love for God and then love for one's fellow believers. And really that statement wraps up what Jesus spoke to wrap up the entirety of the law. When he was asked what the most important of the law was. Be very, very quiet. So all I could think of was Elmer Fudd. Okay. Jesus was asked what was the most important commandment, and he gave two to wrap up the entirety of the law. And it was found in Matthew chapter 22, beginning in verse 36. The question was, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" And Jesus said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." And so we talk about the fact that the law was fulfilled in Jesus. But it didn't make the law go away. They are still his standards. And the only way that we can attain those standards is by his righteousness placed in us by our faith in him. And so we can look at the Ten Commandments and know that the one we believed in fulfilled them. And his life, then, that fulfillment of that righteousness in him then comes through us, at least it's supposed to. And he wrapped them all up in those two statements because to love God with all that you have really speaks of the first four of the Ten Commandments. To love others as yourself speak of the last six of the 10. And that's why he's able to say that on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. It wraps up all of the Old Testament. And so we're supposed to respond like that because of his life in us, our faith in him. It's a result of that. And the final one we mentioned was obedience to God's commandments. And Jesus made it pretty simple. He said in John chapter 14, verse 15, he makes it conditional, if you love me, keep my commandments. And so again, it starts with our love for him. We love him, and he says, if you love me, keep my commandments. And what we're being told here is that is the natural response. That's our reasonable service, as Paul would have said to us in Romans. A reasonable service. To give our lives as a living sacrifice. So if to love God means also keeping his commandments, then what of the one who says he loves God, yet walks in a lifestyle of conscious disobedience? And we meet those. We meet those that say, no, I love God. And yet they live a certain way. I love the conversation you run into, and maybe you've had this experience, you run into somebody you haven't seen in a while, somebody that has been in the family of faith, and you know, they're living in a certain way that really doesn't line up with the commandments of God. And they say something like this very often. They'll go, yeah, but you know, God knows. And I think, yeah, he does. Yeah, he does. Because there's almost an excuse in that. But God knows I love him. But the word's pretty clear here that the response of that love for him is our obedience because of the love. And yes, it's a circular reasoning, but it's true. Because a person like that, it's like a believer who says he walks in fellowship with God, meaning in the light, and yet they walk in darkness by the evidence of the life that we see. And the truth is, that person, not my words, but really the words of Scripture itself, is lying. 1 John chapter 1, verse 6, we read, if we say that we have fellowship with Jesus and walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. And so it's one of those rather painful litmus tests that we can use for ourselves, not to judge others, but it also would prove to some extent the condition of the other. Because the truth is, the very next verse of 1 John 1, verse 7, if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. Again, just the natural outcropping of that relationship first with him, loving him, And then because of that, our reasonable response to that is following his commandments. And what was his big commandment? That we would love one another. And that would be the evidence that we belong to him. We read here, by this we know that we love the children of God when we love God and his commandments. And then it goes on to say, and his commandments are not burdensome. And that seems like a simple statement. And even as believers, we may want to argue with that, because some of the things, we might not say it's unreasonable, but it sure makes us uncomfortable, because it just doesn't go along really most times with what our flesh wants. But I think the other important thing about that statement, that his commandments are not burdensome, is knowing that that's very often the perspective of someone outside the faith about what Jesus teaches and why they won't come to it. Because it is burdensome in their minds. So many see Christianity and biblical wisdom as something that is a system of don'ts. Don't do this, don't do that. A system of limitations, restrictions. And the truth is, those of us that know the word, it's just the opposite of that. It's an absolute opening to nothing but freedom. And so many people would put that away, and especially now, and some could argue, well, it's always been that way, and yes, to some degree since the garden it has been that way. But I think especially now, people want nothing to do with the authority. They want nothing to do with the morality that comes from that authority. And we're going to see that, I think, increase more and more, a moving away from anything that's godly. The Bible's pretty clear. What's evil will be thought of as good, what's good will be thought of as evil, and I don't think you really need to go through another day to prove that to yourself if you're paying attention to what's going on. Jesus spoke of this, I believe, in Matthew chapter 23. Beginning in verse 4, he said, "For they bind heavy burdens hard to bear, and they lay them on men's shoulders." You know, those that do sometimes move within the faith will move in such a way that they've created their own systems, what we call religion, ways that we're supposed to interact with God. And so many of those, as it was in their day with the Pharisees, are things that really keep us away from the freedom that's in Christ. It keeps us away from really getting to know who he is and have that relationship with him. And we want to make sure that we're walking in the freedom that he promises. We don't want to be in a system of religion. When people tell me, oh, so you're religious, and I say, oh no, I'm not. I'm a man of faith, I'm a Christ follower, but I'm not religious. Oh, but don't you go to church? Sure, I go to church. But religion is a man-made system. And there's certain traditions that come from religion that I think are just awesome. And I think we all have the freedom to follow those, as long as we know where they fit in and we don't make them idols. Also in Matthew chapter 11, Jesus prompted the people that were listening, which would include us, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." I mean, Jesus is so gracious to us that he stands there and he proclaims with all truth that, look, I've done the heavy lifting, and I will continue to do the heavy lifting. You just need to stay in right relationship to me. Continue to love me. Continue to do really what are simple things that I've asked, and I'll carry you through this. Yes, we're going to have to do some of the legwork. Thank goodness. I wouldn't want it to be something that we just sit back and idly go through. But he tells us there, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. I mean, he's saying there's a lot of room left in the work that I'm doing. You join with me, and yeah, you'll do some of it, but I'm going to take the majority. You won't even know how much. As a matter of fact, we can look at the cross and understand a little bit of how much. Because none of us could do that. He already did that. And all he says now is enjoy the freedom. Enter in and enjoy the freedom. You know, but it would help if we understood that our willful obedience is first an internal matter and not external. It's about the heart that obeys before it's about the actual act of obedience. See, if we don't understand that, then we're out here somewhere doing a bunch of works, hoping to prove our obedience. trying to show our righteousness. And yet if there's not a heart change from which the action follows, then it's really a waste of time. It doesn't really matter much. It needs to start first as a thought, then as a heart, a movement of the heart, and then let the action come. But the obedience needs to start internally because that's where he is. He's internal. Because we do get ourselves locked into systems of works if we don't understand that. And we're not to be about works. We're to work from our salvation, but not in systems of works. He says his commandments are not burdensome because when we are born again, we are given new hearts. Another thing to remember. We had a heart of stone, we're told. And we're given new hearts when we come and put our faith in him. And those are hearts that were given which by instinct wish to please God because he gave them to us. Why would he give us something that didn't desire him? He gives us a heart that desires him. It would really be a work of our flesh to push that desire away. As a part of the new covenant, the law of God has been written on the heart of every believer. Talked about in the Old Testament, we're giving a new covenant, a better covenant. Not the death of the law, but of life. In Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 33, he says, this is the covenant, and I'm going to throw a word in there. This is the better covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Lord. I will put my law in their minds, write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. No longer written on tablets, stone tablets. No longer the attempt to put them onto a stone heart, but onto a new heart, written within it. And as believers, that's our conscience. That's the conscience that we have. The things that convict us and prompt us to do what we do as believers. So I would say his commandments are not burdensome when we really love God. And when we love God, we'll want to obey him and please him. And I think those two statements are so simple that we can miss how important they are. Just about every place in notice I said our lives, where we lack in that relationship with the Lord, I truly believe it's a lack in the degree which we love him. Because the more we love him, the closer we are to him, and the more we will do that's in line with his will. It's just a formula, and it's true. The thing is, we got to want to. Now, that's an interesting statement, wanting to. Because a lot of things in our lives, both within our faith and even in other places, we say, well, I want to. I really want to. And here's the truth. What you're really saying is, I really want to. Because we spend a lot of time wanting to want. Because if we really wanted to do something, we would do it. I realized that in my life. I said, man, I just want to get this done. Or I just want to do that. I want to accomplish this today. If I really wanted to, it'd happen. But what I'm really saying is I want to. Because I really don't want to. So we need to be honest with ourselves. Do we want to obey him? Really? We don't. If we're past the wanting to want, we really want to obey him, then here's the answer to that. Then love him. Love him. Because when you love someone, it seems little trouble to go to whatever length to help or please that person. Those of us that are married, we know that. When we're fully in love with that person, we're willing to do so much, as opposed to when maybe there's a little disagreement or things aren't as good as they should be. A friend, if you really care for that friend, it seems less burdensome to do what it would take to please them. But why wouldn't we do that? God, why wouldn't we understand that same process exists when God's in the picture? Look at verse 4. For whatever is born of God overcomes the world. And this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. We're going to go through this verse a little bit, and then we're going to come back to it in the end. But I saw this quote today in a book, and I kind of divided it down because I thought it was so well said, and there's so many components to it. So I'm going to give the quote, but I'm going to give it in increments. The first part of the quote was, "The world system is a monstrous scheme of temptation." I thought that was so well said. Because if Satan is truly the prince here, by the permission of God, then everything in his system, in the world system, is there to tempt us. And we could individually speak of all those temptations, but I think we could summarize those by saying, in all ways, to take us in a different direction than God would have us. To turn our eyes from the things of God. To idolize the things of the world. The world system is a monstrous scheme of temptation. And the next part of his statement was always trying to drag us away from God, which is what I just said. It continuously teases us. It whispers from behind walls and trees and says, "Come this way. It's so much better." Or maybe there's times where it says, "No, you can eat of this. You won't surely die." I mean, it's been the same since the beginning. The world system is a monstrous scheme of temptation, always trying to drag us away from God and from what is eternal. Isn't it interesting that we have been promised eternity? And let's be honest, on a daily basis, how often does that capture your imagination? I know in my life it doesn't enough. I'm way too busy looking at the things that are temporal, the things that are right before me, the things that are so important today and may not matter at all tomorrow or even an hour or two from now. And so shouldn't that be our fascination, that we wouldn't be drug away from what we've been promised, which is eternity? I think there's a little bit to think about in that. I think that's why we're given eternity, because we need that much time to consider the things of God. The world system is a monstrous scheme of temptation, always trying to drag us away from God and from what is eternal, and seeking to occupy us with what is temporal and sensual. Temporal. Things that only matter today or for this moment. Things that we're not going to care about or even carry into eternity. And things that are sensual, things that attract our flesh, that do something for our flesh. And when I got to that part of this quote, I thought, and I turned to Ephesians chapter 4, verse 14, and this verse just came to me. It says, "We should no longer be children, tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the trickery of men in the cunning craftiness of deceitful plotting." Surrounded by that. Everything's pushing us one way or another. Everything's trying to steal our attention away from the things of God. All these different doctrines, when the only doctrine we need is in the pages on your lap. And yeah, there's trickery of men. If you didn't watch the news today, maybe you didn't see the latest round. Cunning craftiness of deceitful plotting. It all goes back to those words, which I think are just perfect. A monstrous scheme of temptation. And it is a scheme. It's not arbitrary. Just like I always say, things of God are not arbitrary. The things that happen in this world are not arbitrary either. Satan has a plan. And he's doing his best to make sure you and I are part of his plan. And the way he does it is he studies us. Him and his minions study us. And unfortunately, we don't even have to carry ammunition. He doesn't have to carry ammunition. We give it to him. We say, "Here, use this against me." And then to finish up that quote, it went on to say, "People of the world are completely taken up with the things of time and sense." Again, it's that temporal thing, that sensual thing. And the very last line was, "They have become the victims of passing things." Everything in this world that we don't take into the next life, which by the way is only you, are just passing things. We'll only see them here, most things. And yet it takes up so much of our time. Again, to the words of Jesus, Matthew chapter 6, beginning in verse 19, he warns us, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So true. Look at verse 5, and we'll come back to 4 here in a moment. Who is he who overcomes the world? This is what we want to know. But he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God. Who is he who overcomes the world? Well, first of all, let's think about those 3 words. Overcomes the world. That word overcome, it means to subdue, to conquer, to prevail, to get the victory. You know, isn't it interesting that all the way back in the garden, mankind was told that they were to have dominion over the earth, that they were to subdue it. So when things were in a perfect state, mankind was given the authority to have dominion over the earth and to subdue it. It doesn't feel like we did real well in that. Matter of fact, they lost it before they even got out of the garden. To subdue, to conquer, to prevail, to get the victory. And our motivation to overcome is powerful and comes in the form of a promise that God gave. Listen, from Revelation chapter 2, verse 7. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, I will give to eat from the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise of God. Man, if that's not a motivator to overcome this world, I don't know what is. Remember, that's the exact reason that Adam and Eve were shut out of the garden. They were told, you can eat of every tree in the garden, but of this one tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat. If you do, in that day you will surely die. And Satan came in and twisted those words. They believed him, and they followed him, and their eyes were opened, and suddenly they had knowledge they weren't at least ready to have, if ever to have. And then God puts them out of the garden. He locks the door, basically, so they can't get back in. Why? Because he's so mean and terrible? No, because he loved them and all of us that would come from them so much that what he didn't want them to do is eventually get to that tree of life and eat in a sinful state and live forever like that. So he kept them from making that further mistake. But he promised them that someday, if you believe in the one that I'll send to reconcile you to myself, that you'll have a chance to eat of that tree again. As a matter of fact, the one I'm sending is that tree. Jesus is the tree of life. We eat of him, and we are promised that eternity in paradise someday. But we're here now being told that we need to overcome the things of the world. Why? Because if we don't, we're missing out on that life that he's promised us here. I mean, yes, we've been promised eternity with him, but we have a life we've been promised here in him and him in us. And we can miss that. We can totally miss that. But I just see the motivation to overcome, knowing that we will be with him in paradise someday and have eternal life in just total perfection. And the power to do this, you may say, well, that's beyond me, but it's not if you're a believer. The power to do this is with us. It's within us who believe. Believes what? It says here, who believes that Jesus is the Son of God. And that's not just a casual belief. That's not the intellectual belief. That is the full giving of self to that belief. Really coming into that relationship, knowing he is the Son of God. And if not by him, then by no other way will I be reconciled to the Father. And to know that and that's who lives in us is a powerful thing indeed. And again, how many times in a day do you focus on that? Do you make that your meditation? Do you stop in the midst of your stress, which I didn't do today, and remind myself of this? Romans 8 verse 11. The Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in. Remember when Jesus spoke to those Roman soldiers and they all fell backwards? That was hundreds of soldiers, some on horseback. And he said, I am. And they all fell backward just by the power of this announcement of his name. And then he goes into a grave as a dead man. God raises him back to life by the power of the Spirit. And he tells us that that power is in us. And for some reason, I just have this thing in my mind that when I read that, I should just fall down. I should just end up on my face before the throne, considering that. It's enough to consider that Jesus came, that God came and inhabited the form of a man. And then but I know he was still God. I know I'm not. And yet he would put that Spirit within me and within you to believe. 1 John chapter 4, verse 4 said, you are of God, little children, and have overcome them, because he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. Again, that power within us. But let's answer ourselves a question about that verse. You are of God, little children, have overcome them. Who's them in that verse? In 1 John chapter 4, verse 2, it says, by this know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is of God. And, this is the answer, and every spirit that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is not of God. And this is the spirit of the Antichrist. That's the them. That's the ones who are manipulating and organizing everything that we see happening in the world. We're told that we can overcome them if we're ones that believe in Jesus and Jesus as the Son of God. We can overcome them. We can subdue them. We can have dominion over them. Or actually, that life of Christ in us can. Let's go back to verse 4. We read there, for whatever is born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Now that word victory there means conquest. So we're being told that we're victors, that we're conquerors. But actually, Paul tells us in chapter 8 of Romans, verse 37, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. And then he goes on to say, for I am persuaded that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any created thing shall be able to separate us from the love of God which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. So we have victory because of our faith. We're victors and conquerors because of our faith. We're victors and conquerors because of he who lives in us. But because of he who lives in us, we are more than conquerors. We have something even greater than victory. I don't even know if I can explain that. And this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. How? How is that? Well, listen. Fallen man does what's possible. Faith does the impossible. That's the difference. You know, the writer of Hebrews chapter 11 verse 1 said, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So if we break that down, which is not easy to do, and I've been breaking it down over and over again for years, it's telling us that faith is the assurance or the confirmation of the things we hope for. And it's the proof of the things that we do not see. It's the conviction or the evidence of their reality. Because faith is perceiving or identifying as real fact what is not revealed to the natural senses. Hope you're able to follow that. Our natural senses are taste, sight, touch, smell, sound. Our physical eyesight produces an assurance or evidence of visible things, things that we see. I see it, therefore I believe it. Faith is the organ which enables us to see the invisible. Because there we're able to say, I believe it, therefore I see it. Having faith means that we are certain of the things we hope for, convinced of the thing we do not see. Faith is a hope that is absolutely certain that what it believes is true, and that what it expects will come to pass. We're not speaking of blind faith, because true faith is not blind, but actually sees. Also, this is not a faith that contradicts reason, because it goes beyond reason, because it's supernatural. Our natural senses are carnal, they're fleshly, and entice us to take what we see and can touch and enjoy it. As believers, we put our faith in the Spirit and not our natural senses. And that's a key right there. There are so many times that we say that we're moving in faith. But if we could evaluate, if we could back up and evaluate what we're actually doing, we have to see that too many times when we say we're moving in faith, we're actually still using our natural senses. As believers, we are to put our faith in the Spirit, not our natural senses. Our natural senses are important for earthly matters and for temporal things. But faith regards heavenly matters and eternal things. Faith empowers us to live in the future against the present. Here we are in our situation, but our faith tells us that God's at work. Faith tells us that God has a perfect plan. And so we live based on that in the present for what will come in the future. Matter of fact, if you say to yourself, well, I'm not sure I could live like that, then I'd have to question how you came to faith. Because you came to a point of faith in Christ for what he promised, and so much of what he promised isn't here yet. But we walk in faith that it will be someday. Our natural senses in the present moment often contradict our expectations and our hopes in what the Word of God promises us regarding our future. Again, it's that fight. Am I lacking faith here just because my natural senses are telling me that that's not possible? I think that's what happens a lot. We're not operating over here in the supernatural. And when we don't operate here over in the supernatural, then we get natural results. Because if we're on the natural side of things, we tend to limit God. Because we start to evaluate what he can do by what we can't do. And so if we're over here saying I'm walking in faith, and for some reason we're not seeing a lot of God, it's because we're not over here where he exists. He exists in the things beyond the natural. And so in order not to limit him and to be able to walk in confidence of the things that we don't see, then we have to have our eyes, our spiritual eyes, on him. That's why God gives us a new spirit. That's what it means that we're born again. That's what it means that we're a new creation in Christ Jesus once we're born again. Because we need eyes that aren't of the natural. A lack of faith will often allow temptation to convince our natural senses that the concrete reward of sin in the present moment outweighs the spiritual rewards that are yet to be observed physically. Again, so many times those temptations of the here and now and the natural just overwhelm us, and we never even get to that spiritual part of it because we're so wrapped up in the things of this world. But we're told again that this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. So that's where we need to walk. And as I've said many times in recent times, it's not about having our faith put in our faith. It's not about conjuring up this emotion. It's not about seeking out, well, I just need to have more faith, and so I'm going to order some online. Because we make it a thing. And it's not a thing out here, it's a thing in here. And our faith is in the one that we believe in. That's faith. It's in him doing what he can do. It's in the power that he has. It's about what he's overcome. If we're starting with us and trying to move ourselves into this place of power and thinking that's faith, then our faith is in our faith. And that will fail us every time. Our faith has to be in the one who saved us. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 16 says, when one turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's liberty. See, on the natural side of things, we're always in some sort of bondage. Just by the fact they're natural. I'm in bondage to my eyes. I'm in bondage to my sense of taste, my sense of touch. Because those things I can believe, and I can stay there because it's safe. I can prove it. You taste it too. You touch it too. You look at it. But over here is the freedom. Over here is the victory in what I can't see. Because it's bigger than anything I can. It's beyond anything I can. Nobody outside the faith can even understand that. John chapter 8, verse 36, reminded again, therefore if the Son makes you free, you shall be free indeed. That tells me that I am free of being locked into my natural senses. That I don't have to depend on them any more than what they give me to safely, with some joy, live this life here on earth as I wait for heaven. But I can live in total freedom if I walk in something that's beyond me, that's bigger than me, that's more powerful than me, that can overcome the world. Which really brings us back to a verse to end with. It seems so simple. We oversimplify it. We say it too casually. We read it and we walk by it. 2 Corinthians 5:7, for we walk by faith and not by sight. You know, that needs to be something we tell ourselves often when we're in a situation. We're looking at something and we're evaluating it and we pretty sure we know how it's going to turn out. At least that's how we think it's going to turn out. That's what we convince ourselves. And the fact is, it's because I am looking at it with my physical eyes. And I know in my own life, I know the stress that causes. I know the aggravation. I know the wasted time. I know the aggravation I cause others around me. But the fact is, if I get my eyes off of what I can see, I can get them beyond my circumstances onto the one that I'm supposed to put my faith in. It changes everything. It changes everything. Remember, I think one of the central things that I want to emphasize is just make it your goal to love him more. Because I truly believe that that is one goal that will lead to the improvement of your entire spiritual life. Is if you can just desire and move in that direction to love him more. We will rest there this evening. I want to do something before